Hello, I'm Ollie, and if you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you'll know exactly what I'm going to say next. So I'm not going to say it, but what I will say is, welcome to part 2 of my 500 subs extravaganza. So I wanted to start by simply saying thank you. As I've said before, when I started this channel, I never expected to get to 100 subs, let alone more than that. I certainly didn't expect to be doing a 500 sub special. And in fact, at the point of recording today, I'm actually at 650. So I am, well above 500. And I thank each and every one of you for subscribing and watching my videos. I really genuinely hope you enjoy them. If you do, then I guess I don't understand why. I just come on here and babble about books, and enough of you seem to enjoy that for it to feel like a worthwhile thing to continue doing. But thank you, it does mean a lot to me. I am, as I think I've said before in another video, I'm a deeply introverted person. If you told me a year ago that I was going to have a YouTube channel, I would have been very surprised. It's not something that feels like a natural thing to me, speaking in public. And I guess, that's the nice thing about YouTube is I'm kind of in public, but I'm not in public. And I guess that's why it works for me. And hopefully it works for you guys as well. So it does genuinely mean a lot to me to have this kind of outlet, I suppose, because I'm not someone who talks easily in real life. If you met me in real life, you would very quickly appreciate that. So yeah, thank you very much. So what's the plan for this video then? So if you've watched part 1 of my 500 subs extravaganza, you will know that I put out an ask for people to ask questions for a Q&A. So I'm going to be answering the questions in the Q&A. I think I've had 20 or 21 questions, which is fantastic. And then after that, I will be spinning the wheel of fortune to see who has won the giveaway. So lots of people have entered the giveaway, and they stand to win these 4 books. So The Hard Way by Lee Child, Killer's Wedge by Ed McBain, Boston Blitz by Don Pendleton, and Let's Go Play at the Adams by Mendel Johnson. So yeah, I will spin the wheel of fortune towards the end of the video and see who has won. But first, let's get into the Q&A. So thank you to everyone who asked a question. We've got some great questions in here, which I will work through now. I've copied them all over very nerdily into a spreadsheet. I've got a cup of tea here to sip while I go through the questions and answer them. So yeah, I'm just going to go through them in the order that they were asked and respond to them. I guess that's what you're supposed to do in a Q&A, isn't it? So I have a sip of tea to wet my whistle and then we'll get going. Okay, so the first question is from Arthur Odell, who actually asked 2 questions. So his first question was, have you read the Destroyer books by Warren Murphy? Are they any good? I've only seen the movie. So I've read the first one. I read it, I checked on my Goodreads because I was sure I had read it, and I read it 10 years ago. So I read it in 2012 and I gave it 3 stars and said it was pretty fun. So I think I thought it was a bit slow in the middle, but fun apart from that. If you don't know the series, so it's about a guy called Remo Williams, who's in the way of these series, who's kind of a bit of a lone hero, who goes around righting wrongs. So in answer to the question, Arthur, I've only read the first one. It's fine. It's an enjoyable pulp adventure. I haven't read any more, which suggests I didn't think it was that amazing. But yeah, it's certainly a fun read, and I do like the movie. So if anyone's not seen the movie, it came out I guess in the late 80s, and I think it's Fred Ward who's in Tremors. So he's the guy who plays opposite Kevin Bacon in Tremors. He plays Remo Williams, and it's kind of a slightly spoofy movie from what I remember, but a fun watch. Okay, next question from Arthur. This is a good question. Do you distinguish crime as a genre from mystery? And do you read mysteries like Agatha Christie, etc. as well? So I think my answer to this question is I consider crime to be, if you think about the kind of taxonomy, I consider crime to be the top level and mystery to be a subset of crime. So, you know, as I see it, you've got crime, and then under that you might have mystery, you might have domestic noir, you might have gangster novel or whatever. Police procedural, although police procedural is kind of mystery, isn't it? It's always a tough one, this, and I think there tends to be a lot of blurring between them, and also I'd say I think different people use them in different ways. So when you see someone on BookTube nowadays talking about a thriller, they typically mean what I would call a domestic noir. So you know, often a story about you know, a woman who's in some sort of peril, you know, who's got a dodgy husband or something like that. Whereas when I use the term thriller, I'm thinking of like Alistair MacLean or that kind of thing. You know, I'm thinking of, I suppose, what you'd call an adventure novel, or Tom Clancy, or, you know, that kind of espionage type thing. So I think different people have different meanings for those words. So I do consider. So yeah, so I could. This is a very rambly answer. So I consider mystery to be a subset of crime. And yes, I definitely read mysteries. So I really like mysteries. I really like Agatha Christie, and I've read some really good Japanese mysteries as well recently. So yeah, I very much enjoy the that kind of puzzle element, and the delight of getting to the end of a mystery and finding out who done it. So yeah, definitely enjoy mysteries. Okay, next question from Pax Panic. If you don't follow Pax, her channel is brilliant and well worth a look. She's very engaging, talks a lot about, you know, horror in particular, but always fun to watch. Okay, this is a question I need to think about. So the question is, what book do you think that everyone in the world should read? Okay, so my answer to this is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. So this is not a crime, pulp or horror novel. It's a science fiction novel written, I think, the 60s. And I think it was originally a short story, and then got expanded into a novel. But it's a wonderful, wonderful book. So it's in the way that great science fiction often is. It takes a simple concept and just runs with it. And the concept of this book is that a guy with like below average intelligence, so with basically learning difficulties, is given a treatment by a scientist that makes him super intelligent. And the book is written from that character's perspective. And, you know, the book starts before he has had the treatment, when he's preparing to have the treatment. So the way language is written and used in the book changes completely as the book progresses. I'm not going to give away. I think it's a famous enough story that many people probably know the ending, but I'm not going to give it away. But it's a really wonderful book about society and about science and about the way we think about other people in society and the way we treat each other. And it's a lovely book, very, very moving. And I think even though it's science fiction, anyone would enjoy it. It's a great, great story. Okay, next question. This comes from Jeremy Fee. What are your thoughts on the movie Pulp Fiction? So interesting question. So I saw Pulp Fiction when it came out of the cinema. So back in the day when Quentin Tarantino was the was the bright young thing. I'd seen Reservoir Dogs in the cinema as well. So my thoughts on Pulp Fiction are, I like it, but I don't love it. I definitely don't think it's Tarantino's best film. And I think Tarantino is someone who I would classify as a bit of a mixed bag. I think he's a fantastic technical director. I love his passion for cinema and his geekiness. I think his movies lack heart sometimes. I think sometimes it feels like he is making films about people who are movie characters rather than about people who are people. And I think that gets in the way of the audience's emotional connection with the film and with what's happening to the characters in the film. But that said, I do enjoy his films. I really enjoyed Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. and did a review for his novelisation of that film, which I also really enjoyed. So yeah, I like Pulp Fiction, but I don't think it's an amazing film like some people do. Okay, I'm going to have a sip of tea and then ask the next question. Okay, right, so 2 questions now from Alan at the Lonely Bookshelf. So the first question is, what is the process you took to becoming an author? So Peter, this isn't something I've talked about much on the channel, though I have mentioned it. So I have in my past written a couple of novels and a bunch of sort of short stories, which I self-published on Amazon. And what process did I take to doing that? I don't think I really had a process. So I'd always enjoyed creative writing and really enjoyed, you know, when I was at school, I really enjoyed it when you got to write a story rather than having to write an essay about something. And it was something I'd tried at various points in my life. I had tried creative writing for pleasure rather than, you know, when at school, and had tried I'd started probably a dozen novels and never got anywhere with them. And in the year that I was due to turn 40, so it was my New Year's resolution in 2013, I decided I would knuckle down and write a novel, and I did it. So I made that resolution the 1st of January, and by I think mid-February I'd written a book which is called Sunliner, and it was one of those weird things where it felt like no effort at all, in that the story just kind of fell out of me, and I was compelled to write it, I suppose. And I subsequently then wrote some short stories after that, and another novel as well called One Night. The only stuff I've written that had any real sort of success was a series of short stories I wrote called A Cat Called Hope, which are about written from the perspective of a cat who has various adventures with people he meets. So it's a bit like a cat version of The Littlest Hobo, if you remember that TV show from the 80s. So yeah, I didn't really have a process, it just happened. And equally, just as it happened, it just unhappened, in that I just lost the ability to write. So I had 2 or 3 years when I was very, very productive. And as I say, I wrote a couple of novels and a dozen or so short stories. And since then, whenever I've tried to start something, it just hasn't worked. I've got a couple of other novels which are kind of a third written, which I may go back to at some point if I ever get that spark again. But as things stand at the moment, I'm not writing, and don't anticipate that I'll be writing again. Okay, so second question from Alan at the Lonely Bookshelf is, what is your education background? So, you know, a pretty normal one really. So I'm English, clearly. I went to school in England, you know, primary school, then middle school, and then secondary school. So stayed at school up until the age of 18. So I did GCSEs. So I think I was the first year that did GCSEs, or the second year, and then A levels. So I've got 3 A levels, which were in English, history, and economics. I then went to university, so I went to Sussex University and have ended up staying down here on the south coast by the sea, where I studied media studies, which was very enjoyable. So I learnt a lot of interesting stuff about film theory, had some great lecturers who, you know, I really enjoyed learning from, learnt a lot. You know, Sussex is quite a left-wing university, so I learnt a lot about kind of Marxist and feminist film theory and things like that. And a lot about, you know, the press and censorship and things. So it was all really, really interesting. Completely useless from a career perspective. I did at one point, you know, harbour dreams of working in the film industry and becoming a screenwriter or director or something like that. But you know, clearly that never happened. So yeah, I've got a degree in media studies which I've never used. When I left uni, I ended up working in nursing homes because I needed a job to pay the rent. And subsequently decided I was going to go back to university and do a nursing degree because I really enjoyed nursing. But then injured my back at work quite badly and was off work for an extended period of time. And whilst I'd got a place to go back to university to do this nursing degree, decided that it wasn't the right thing to do. So my education history might have taken a different path, but but in the end didn't. I ended up temping for a bank, and that's where I still work. So yeah, I had all my career aspirations have come to nothing. So wanted to work in the film industry, don't do that. Wanted to be a nurse, don't do that. But I do really enjoy the job I've ended up doing, and I do feel like it's something worthwhile. And if there's one thing I would encourage young people, if there are any young people watching, I don't know if there are, but what I encourage my son to do is to think about your plan for education, think about what you want to end up doing, and think about how the choices you make in education can help you get there. So the next question comes from Mr. Morningstar, and it is, can you share your definition of pulp writing? For me, pulp writing, pulp fiction is about it's about publishers publishing material that they think addresses a particular want or need in the market. So really it's about publishers knowing that something is popular and that people are going to buy it, and doing whatever they can to get content out there to satisfy that demand. So it's not about quality, it's not about artistic endeavour, it's about knowing something is popular and churning stuff out to meet that demand. So in very much the same way as B movies are about exploiting demand for something in the market. I think for me that's what pulp fiction is, and that's why series I think are really a big deal in pulp fiction and continuing characters, because when you've got that kind of continuing character, there's a demand there, and that's why you've got lots of classic pulp series like like the Conan books or the Conan stories, like The Executioner, where the person who created the character and started writing the books, only wrote a relatively small fraction of the total number, because the publishers see that there's that demand there. So when in the case of Robert E. Howard, when he sadly died, or in the case of the Executioner books, when Don Pendleton sold the rights and moved away, the publishers knew there was still a demand there, so they hired other people to write the stories. So for me, that's it's very much about quickly creating content that meets a demand, and where the desire to get stuff out at pace to exploit that demand before it evaporates is a key driver rather than artistic endeavour. Now, all of that said, that doesn't mean that you can't get pulp fiction that is fantastically well written, that is brilliantly conceived, and has great characters and great plots and all that stuff. There's definitely examples of that, and that for me is the real pleasure of pulp, is finding those gems that are where the publisher has just wanted to make a quick buck, but the writer has come up with something fantastic. I think there's a real pleasure in that kind of thing. It almost feels slightly subversive in that the publisher's just been trying to make money, but the writer's snuck some brilliance in there. So that's the kind of thing I love, and I love that in cinema as well. I love things like movies like the Evil Dead series, which are on the face of it cheap, nasty horror movies, but actually have moments of genius in them, and of real artistic creativity and things like that. So yeah, that's both my definition of pulp and why I love pulp. Okay, next question comes from Parlabane is back. Do bad reviews ever speed you on to read the book? Yes, definitely. That said, I don't tend to look at reviews. I certainly am not someone who goes out and reads reviews of new releases, really. I tend to just get attracted to books when I see them, really. So I might see someone who I respect on YouTube talking about a book, and that might well spur me on to get a copy. But more than that, I look at I read the backs of books, and little blurbs on the backs of books might spur me on to buy it. But I certainly don't seek out reviews for books. But I do like I do like reading books that have offended people, and I do love the technique that some publishers use. And one of my favourite novels is The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks. I remember certainly the paperback copy I've got of that, one of the reviews on the back, which I think was from the Times, or one of the quite serious British newspapers, said that it was the lurid literary equivalent of a video nasty. And I remember as a teenager, as soon as I saw that blurb, I was like, yeah, I've got to read this. So yeah, bad reviews definitely spur me on, particularly when they're bad reviews from, the kind of stuffy, literary society that suggests that a book is, not perceived as being of quality, of being the right sort of book. That definitely then becomes a book I want to read. Okay, next question was actually asked by two people. So those people are Caesar Miss, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, apologies if I'm not, and Ross Alexander. And the question is there a book you've read a lot of times? And the answer to this is yes, but not as an adult. So when I was a kid, I used to, I had favourite books and I read them many, many times. Particularly, I'm trying to think of particular ones. So the Swallows and Amazons books I read multiple times. Doctor Who and the Dinosaur Adventure, which was a real favourite of mine, I read many times. So yeah, as a kid, I used to reread a lot. Partly probably because, I read all the time, even as a child. And I didn't have the money to go out and buy books. So I was limited to, to birthdays when I could ask for new books and what I could find at the library. And it was a fairly small library, so there wasn't always a great selection. So I used to reread a lot when I was a kid. As an adult, I don't reread much at all, or at least I didn't. I've started in the last year or two rereading more. So last year, 2021, I think I reread 18 or 19 books, which is a lot for me. And I enjoyed that experience, but I'm not a big rereader. I'm more someone who's kind of looking for the next thing and trying to. I kind of think of myself. It sounds awful, I suppose, but I kind of think of myself as a consumer of stories, and I want to read as many stories as possible. Okay, next question. Okay, this is a good question. So this again from CISO Miss. Apologies, I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Is there a book which you read when you were younger and you had to try and track down the book from your memory? So there is. I have talked about this before on the channel in a video. I can't remember which one, but I think it's a fun story. So this is the book. It is Unbalanced Acts by Jeff Rains. So I read this book. Let me see when it was published. It was published in 1990. So I read this book, I think, around the time it came out. This is an American paperback copy of it. I originally had a UK paperback, and I'll try and find a copy of the cover, a picture of the cover of the UK paperback and flash it up, because it's a really fantastic cover. And as soon as you see the cover, you'll see why I bought the book. So the book is about an evil genius who frees a load of psychopaths from prison and holds a city ransom with the threat of these people committing mass murder. What led me to try and track it down again was when I used to walk my son to school when he was younger. He, knowing that I was really into books and writing as well at that point, he used to make up stories for me, and he used to give me ideas for stories all the time. Every day he'd come up with something different. And one day he said, wouldn't it be cool if there was a story about someone who freed a load of killers and was going to get them to commit crimes for him? And I was like, yeah, I'm sure I read a book about that. I think someone's already written that. And this was, this must have been 25 years probably after I read the book. And I was like, I'm sure I read a book about that, but I can't remember what it's called. And I racked my brains, I searched Google, I really had a desire to read this book again, him having come up with the same story. I couldn't remember what it was called at all. I searched, as I say, looked on Goodreads, searched Google, couldn't find it, couldn't figure out what it was. And then I had a day off work, and I decided to go into Brighton, which is the nearest city to here, and have a real book buying splurge. And I went round pretty much all the second-hand bookshops in Brighton, which, if you know Brighton, there's quite a lot, and all the charity shops as well. And in one charity shop on a street called, not charity shop, second-hand bookshop, on a street called Trafalgar Street in Brighton. And this is a really run-down building with like a basement, and the basement of it is just full of books, just randomly chucked all over the place. There's kind of a way they're arranged, but in classic second-hand bookshop style, you pretty much on your own. You just have to figure it out. And anyway, I found this book and I was like, that's the damn book. That's the book I was looking for. So obviously I bought it. Subsequently, you know, this was probably 4 or 5 years ago. I haven't got around to rereading it yet, but I will do soon. I might even read it this month, actually. Now I've talked about it. But yeah, so this is a book that I had to track down again, having been reminded of it. Okay, next question is from Darnell Holland. So 2 questions from Darnell. So first question is, I was wondering what type of non-fiction do you like reading, and if there are any specific authors you look out for. So I'm not a big non-fiction reader. I do quite like reading kind of politics type stuff sometimes, so I'm quite interested in politics. And I also quite like reading true crime occasionally, and also kind of pop science type stuff. I do find that quite interesting, but I'm not a huge reader. There is one writer of non-fiction who I do really like, who I've read a few books by, and that's a guy called Ben McIntyre, who writes kind of, I suppose it's kind of military history, but it's not typical military history. So he's written, I think my favourite book by him was a book called Agent Zigzag, which is about a guy who was like a triple agent during the Second World War, which is just really fun. And Ben McIntyre's got a really engaging way of writing. He's written a book about Kim Philby, the British MI5, I can't remember if it was MI5 or MI6, but he was a British spy who was a double agent for the Russians, which is really good as well. So I do like his book. I've read a few of his books, and he's very good. Okay, next question from Darnell. I was wondering how Lee Child compares to Tom Clancy in terms of writing style and how they read. I think they're quite different, to be honest with you. So definitely different in terms of subject matter, in that, you know, Tom Clancy's books tend to have a broader scope and be, you know, geopolitical, whereas Lee Child's books, whilst I wouldn't call Lee Child a crime writer, they're closer to crime books in that, you know, they tend to have, you know, simpler plots or smaller scale plots, shall we say. There is a bit of kind of spy stuff in there sometimes, but I think they're quite different. And I think Lee Child is a better writer as well. I think Tom Clancy is one of those people where probably, you know, partly because of his success, he got away with just not being edited at all towards the end of his career. And I think some of his books are much longer than they need to be, and also can be quite repetitive. There's certainly things he mentions a lot in his books. Like there's a thing he was always going on about how in Britain they don't have mixer taps on sinks, and how that's really crazy. That's something that crops up a number of times in his books. So I think Lee Child for me is a better writer. I think his books are tighter, and they tend, you know, whilst you know, on paper, Jack Ryan is the hero of the Tom Clancy books. I think there's a bit more of a you know, there's a consistent group of characters that turn up in the Tom Clancy books who all play their part, like, you know, John Clark and people like that, and whatever the Admiral's called, I forget his name now. Greer. So yeah, there's consistent characters that always work with Ryan, whereas in the Jack Reacher books, is typically just Reacher, and you know, sometimes there are other characters that get pulled in, but he's the constant rather than there being a whole cast of constant characters. So yeah, I think they're quite different. I do quite like both. I'm not read any Clancy for years and years, and should probably try again. I have got a copy of The Hunt for Red October on my Kindle, and I think it's one of the books that we're going to be reading for AJ Dunn's Killer Reads book club. So I will be reading that again at some point. But yeah, Lee Child would be my favourite of the two. Okay, next up, a question from Caleb. Now, I did ask Caleb how you pronounce his surname, and I forgot to check before I start this video. Oh, I remember now. It's Hurick. So Caleb Hurick. Okay, question from Caleb. Does your family also like to read, and do they like the same kind of books as you? If not, are you ever judged for your trashier taste? So yes and no. So my family, in terms of like my parents and my sister, are all avid readers. And you know, my dad in particular was a real inspiration for me when I was younger, and you know, was someone who really inspired me to read. My mum reads a lot as well. and my sister is an English teacher, so she definitely reads. My family, in terms of my wife and son, are not big readers. My wife does love audiobooks and has an Audible subscription, and gets through a fair few audiobooks, but neither of them are big readers. So in terms of my mum and dad and my sister, my dad has fairly similar taste to me. So he's not a horror fan, and he's not so much a crime fan, but he really likes like science fiction and thrillers. And when I was growing up, I got lots of recommendations for him. And in fact, he was the person who recommended Flowers for Algernon to me. So he definitely doesn't judge my taste. My mum does. So my mum's always sending me books, well, not always, but fairly often sends me books in the post that she thinks I like, which are like, sort of wanky modern literary fiction, which I don't really enjoy. So I do try and read them. And to be fair, sometimes she sends me something that I do enjoy, but more often than not, I DNF them, to be completely honest. And she definitely judges my taste. But yeah, well, let's leave that there. Okay, next question from Pickled Beetroots, which is a great name. Throughout a couple of your videos, I've spotted an amazing rotating watch box. It's behind you in this photo even. Do you collect watches? If so, will we ever get a closer look at them in a video? So yes, I do collect watches. So yeah, big watch fan. If you like watches, follow my Instagram account, which is @whatmeworry. I'll put a link to it. I'll try and remember to put a link to it in the description for the video, where I share watch pictures. I have done one watch video for this channel. So I did a review of my Doxa Sub 300, which is very similar to the watch that Dirk Pitt wears in the Clive Cussler novels. So I felt like there was a bookish enough connection to do a review of a watch on a book channel. But yeah, I don't intend to share my watches particularly on this channel. And maybe I'll do a poll on the community tab and see if people want me to. But I will do a watch check for today. So I'll put up a close-up of this, but today I'm wearing my Marathon MSAR, which is a military issue watch made by a Canadian company for the military. So MSAR stands for Medium Search and Rescue. So it's a dive watch that's designed to be used in the toughest of environments. I think it's got 300 meters water resistance. It's got radioactive tubes on the dial, so it glows all the time. You don't have to charge the dial in sunlight to get it to glow, and it's incredibly tough and hard wearing. So definitely the sort of watch you need for reading books and making videos about books. So yeah, I do really like watches. I'm definitely a watch nerd, as well as being a book nerd. But yeah, not intending really to talk about them too much on the channel unless there's a demand for it. Okay, next question from Mark R. So I've kind of covered this one already, but do you have any plans to write more books, and if so, what genre? So as I said in the answer to the previous question about my writing, probably not, but if I get gripped by that bug again, then yeah, definitely. And if I was to write something, I think I'd quite like to try something pulpy. So I did do a couple of kind of pulpy short stories about a character called Guillotine. So back in the days when I was writing, so there's this woman called Guillotine who goes around, avenging wrongs by chopping people's heads off. And I enjoyed writing those stories. They were quite fun. And I did at the time have ideas for a few more Guillotine stories, and did start writing a Guillotine novel, although I didn't get very far with it. So I think if I do ever get gripped by the bug again, I'll probably do a kind of pulpy series. Next question is from The Watch Femme, and the question is, I'm suffering from a bit of a reading slump, even though I've got several things on the go I'm really enjoying. Do you have any tips for getting on with things and finishing books? And my answer to this is probably not great advice. My advice would be put the book down. If you're struggling to get through a book, even if you feel like you're enjoying it, but you're finding you're not picking it up, I would put it down for a bit and try something else. So I would, whenever I have a reading slump, I tend to fall back on a writer I know is really reliable. And particularly, I tend to go for shorter books. So I find if I'm in a reading slump, if I can find a book I'm pretty confident I'm going to enjoy, that's quite short and I'll get through quickly, that kind of, it reinvigorates my reading mojo, I suppose. So, you know, I'll like grab an Edmund Bain book I haven't read or something like that, because I know I'm going to enjoy them and they're short. And that usually gets my juices flowing again, shall we say. So that's the only advice I've got, really, I'm afraid. But I do hope you get out of the slump soon, because reading slumps are the worst. Next question, which comes from One Plagued by Visions. What is the best book you've read in a genre you don't particularly like or care for? This is a difficult one, because to be honest with you, whilst I specialise in crime, pulp, horror, and also talk about sci-fi a bit, I do, you know, I quite like most genres. There's no genre that I would say I dislike. There's genres I'm more drawn to than others. I guess maybe, you know, the genre that's furthest from, you know, my normal kind of thing, apart from kind of general literary fiction. And I suppose, so let's talk about general literary fiction. So I really liked A Little Life. So I read that last year, and I thought that was a fantastic book, you know, deeply moving, you know, really affecting, and just beautifully written, and, you know, completely gripping despite how troubling the subject matter was. So that would be, you know, that would definitely be one. In terms of a more kind of popular fiction type genre, I guess my favourite book that isn't crime, pulp or horror probably, is a book called The Delinquents by an author called CriminOlly Rowan, who is an Australian author, and I think The Delinquents came out in the late 50s or 60s, and it's a romance novel. So I think the idea behind the book was, you know, what if Romeo and Juliet were juvenile delinquents, you know, contemporary juvenile delinquents? And the book is about that. It's about these two young people who fall in love, and, you know, the troubles and the challenges they go through in their relationship, and in being accepted by society because they're young and society doesn't take them seriously. So it's a really sweet, moving romance novel. I really like it. It's quite gritty in places because it's about, you know, kind of impoverished people in, you know, in 50s Australia. CriminOlly Rowan sadly died very young of cancer, I think, so she only published 2 books, that one and another one called Down by the Dockside. And I think she was writing a 3rd novel when she died, but I think that's never been published. But I think The Delinquents is a really, really great book, and was, I say famously, it wasn't that famously, at the time it was a big deal. So I guess it was late 80s or early 90s, it was filmed with Kylie Minogue, the singer, in the role of, I'm trying to remember what the girl's name in it. I can't remember the name of the girl in the book now, but she plays the lead female role in the film. The film's not great, but fun for having you know, a young Kylie in it. But yeah, so yeah, The Delinquents, I guess, would probably be my pick for that question. Next question from Greg at Another Bibliophile reads, what is a favourite pulp cover? This is an impossible question to answer because I love them all. So I really genuinely thought long and hard about this question, and I can't think of an answer to it. There's just something about the style of pulp covers. And going back to the question earlier about, you know, my definition of pulp fiction, you know, the covers are really part of that. And it goes back to that point of them being there just to make money. Is the covers are so eye-catching, and so, you know, they just pull you into the book and make you want to read it immediately. So I love all pulp covers. I love the cheesiness of them. I love the kind of, I suppose, hyper-masculinity of them. So, you know, the you know, on fantasy books like the Conan books, you know, the kind of rippling muscles and the scantily clad females. I love the, you know, the square-jawed heroes of the detective pulps, and, you know, the dames in their long dresses. I love the, you know, the guns and the swords, and I love all that stuff. So I definitely wouldn't even try to pick one because it wouldn't be fair on all the others. I love them all. They really speak to me somehow. They're, you know, it's an art. I think, you know, the pulp cover is an art form in its own right, and should be recognised as such. There's something about that kind of, you know, it's you know, I suppose a book cover is always an advert for the book, but with pulp covers it feels, you know, that's more true than ever. And I think it's such a shame that modern book covers tend to be so boring, particularly on, you know, popular fiction. They're so dull. You know, if I pick the, you know, look at this Jack Reacher book. So, you know, this is a big series, and you could argue the Reacher books are kind of like the modern equivalent of a Pulp series. You know, it's fine, the cover, but it's, you know, it's not very interesting, is it? It's just a, I don't even know what it is. It's like a, I don't even know if it's a painting. I think it's a photo that's been made to look like a painting of a diner, you know, on a street corner. It's like, it's not sexy, it's not eye-catching, it's nothing. And yeah, the covers in the past were so much better, and it makes me sad that we've lost that talent. Okay, so penultimate question is from Cozy Reading with Quaker Cats. So this is in response to the community post I put up with a picture of Venus, the family cat. The question is, Venus is gorgeous, do you have any other pets? So firstly, I'm going to get Venus to say hello. And secondly, in answer to the question, do we have any other pets? So no, not at the moment. So we have, my son has had a couple of hamsters over the years. Sadly, you know, hamsters don't last very long, which is, I guess, one of the reasons why they're a good pet for a kid, teaching them about the circle of life and so on. So yeah, we've had 2 hamsters, Metro and Pebble, who have both sadly passed away over the years. Prior to that, we did have a rabbit called Timothy, who sadly was taken by a fox. So originally Timothy was a house rabbit when my wife and I lived in a flat, and then when we moved to this house and had a garden, he moved into the garden and had a hutch in the garden. But sadly, one day when my son and I got home from school, we found that the cage had been torn open and Timothy was gone. And it had clearly been torn open from the outside, so we think an urban fox took Timothy, which was a moment of great sadness for us. But yeah, Venus is gorgeous. She's very soppy. She's a Selkirk Rex, so she's not a proper cat. She's more of a teddy bear than a cat. She doesn't really do cat stuff. She does go out in the garden sometimes, but she doesn't, you know, she doesn't leap up fences or anything like that. She's much happier sitting on your lap and purring contentedly. Final question then from Monster Blood. Are there any books you've read recently that made you want to check out the rest of their published work? And are there any authors you used to love but have gotten sick of, burned out on their books? So in answer to the first question, yeah, this happens all the time to me. I think probably the example that comes to mind recently was when I read the first Edge book. So I bought the first book in the Edge series on my Kindle after having seen it on Instagram, and immediately I loved it so much that I ended up buying, and I've now got several dozen paperbacks in the series, and I'm working my way through them. So this is by George G. Gilman, so it's a Western series from the 70s. So yeah, definitely. That definitely happens to me a lot, and I have a terrible habit of reading one book by an author and then immediately going out and buying as many books as I can find by them, and then those books sitting on my shelf and not getting read. I used to have, having read one Harold Robbins novel, I think I used to have about 20 Harold Robbins books and never read any of them. So it's a bit of a problem for me. Are there any authors you used to love but have gotten sick of? So probably not, but I definitely go through phases with authors. So, you know, Stephen King was an author who, through my teens and 20s, you know, I religiously bought everything he wrote as soon as it came out and devoured it. And then, you know, kind of in my 30s and early 40s, you know, did fall out of love with him a bit. You know, stopped reading him so much. And there's a few books from that period that I did buy and didn't finish. And you know, I am getting into him again a bit more now, and I've, you know, read a few things of his over the last few years. But whereas, you know, there was one point in my life when I would have, without hesitation, said he was my favourite author, I definitely, you know, I definitely don't love his stuff as much as I used to. So yes, that's all the questions. Thank you very much to everyone who answered the question. I've got no idea how long I've been babbling on for, but I think it's probably a while. So if you've stuck with me this far, thank you very much for doing so. Right, I am now going to have another sip of tea, which is a bit cold now, and then spin the Wheel of Fortune and see who's won the giveaway. Okay, so I have got the wheel up here on my laptop. I'm going to capture the screen and magically embed it in the video, but I'm going to spin that wheel now. So round and round and round she goes. Where she stops, nobody knows. And the winner is Another Bibliophile Reads. So congratulations, Greg. I know you're a huge fan of Mac Bolan, so I'm sure you'll enjoy this. And also, so Greg, in his wrap up for 2021, I think this was the first Mac Bolan book was one of his 2 least favourite books of the year. So he may choose to pass this one on to somebody else. But I think you will enjoy. I think you said in a comment that you've read a couple of McBain, so I definitely think you'll enjoy the McBain, and I think you'll like Let's Go Play at the Adams as well, and everyone should read Jack Reacher because he's great fun. So hopefully you will enjoy those, Greg. If you send me your address, so email me. My email address is in the description for the video and also in my about on my channel. So send me your email and I will send these books to you. And Greg is someone who's doing my 100 book challenge, so you get 4 free books in your 100 book challenge, Greg. So some new stuff to read, even if the execution book probably isn't to your taste. So I just wanted to close by saying thank you again. So, you know, as I said at the start, I've been blown away with the success of this channel. I really appreciate everyone's time in watching, and I wanted to say a special thanks to, you know, the other booktubers who've supported me, you know, in the early days of my channel, who've given me advice, who've commented on my videos, who've talked about me in their videos, so who've done shout outs for me. So particularly one Plagued by Visions, who's, you know, a giant of the community, and, you know, really supportive for many people, and gave me an early shout out, which really helped. And also, you know, a thanks to everyone who's taking part in the 100 book challenge. So off the top of my head, I should have made a list, but off the top of my head, it's one at Plagued by Visions, Michael K. Vaughan, Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads, Austin at Monster Blood, Jesse at Bartell's Bookshelf, David Wiley, and I know there are other people as well. Oh, Tome Raider, I think, is doing it too. So, you know, thanks to all of those people for joining me in the challenge, which I'm finding, I think, more fun than other people maybe. But for giving me shout outs as a result of, you know, being part of that challenge. I think all of those things have really helped with the growth of my channel. And also thanks to Steve Donahue, who regularly on his channel says how stupid he thinks the 100 book challenge is. But, you know, hey, any publicity is good publicity, I guess. And I think, you know, all of those mentions have helped with the channel. But, you know, the biggest thanks is to you, the people who are watching. I really do appreciate your time. I know there's many choices you could be making of other things to do with your time, including reading, which is what you should really be doing. But, you know, I do hope you find these videos interesting and enjoyable. Do let me know in the comments other things you'd like me to cover and talk about. But yeah, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. It's been a great journey for me so far. I'm really enjoying it. And yeah, let's keep going and see what the future brings for us all, book-wise. So happy reading, everyone. I hope you're all safe and well. And I will talk to you again very soon. As always, cheerio.